You don't look like you belong in first class, honey. Step aside." Those 12 words were the last mistake Patricia Muldoon would ever make in her career. It was a rainy Tuesday at JFK, the kind of day where patience is thin and tempers are short. But when the gate agent decided to humiliate a quiet woman in a beige trench coat for suspicious behavior, she didn't realize she was lighting a fuse that would blow up the entire company. She thought she was gatekeeping a seat. She didn't know she was blocking the woman who had just bought the airline 45 minutes ago. This is the story of how arrogance met its match and the brutal, satisfying karma that followed. The fluorescent lights of JFK's Terminal 4 hummed with a low, headache-inducing buzz, a sound that seemed to vibrate right behind the eyes of the 300 passengers waiting at Gate B-22. Outside the tarmac was a grey wash of torrential rain, delaying flights up and down the East Coast. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee-damp wool and mounting anxiety. Sarah Desmond stood near the back of the priority boarding lane, checking her watch. It was a vintage Cartier tank, understated and scratched just enough to hide its $50,000 value. She pulled the collar of her beige cashmere trench coat tighter. She had been awake for 36 hours, finalizing a deal in London before catching a red-eye to New York, only to connect here for a final leg to Chicago. She wasn't trying to stand out. In fact, Sarah had spent her entire life trying to blend in. Even now, standing on the precipice of a career-defining moment, she looked less like a corporate shark and more like a tired graduate student. She wore dark denim jeans, clean white sneakers, and a simple black hoodie underneath the trench coat. No logos. No flash. Zone 1 first class and Diamond Medallion members only. The voice crackled over the PA system. It was sharp, nasal, and devoid of warmth. Sarah adjusted the strap of her leather weekender bag and shuffled forward. She just wanted to sleep. The seat in 1A was waiting for her, a lie-flat pod where she could finally close her eyes and process the fact that as of 8 a.m. that morning, her private equity firm, Desmond & Co., had acquired a controlling 51% stake in Vanguard Airlines. She was technically the boss of every single person in this terminal, but nobody knew that yet. The press release wasn't scheduled to drop until the markets closed. At the podium stood Patricia "Patty" Muldoon. Patty was a Vanguard veteran of 20 years, a woman who wore her polyester navy blue uniform like a suit of armor. She had a tight, sprayed, stiff, blonde bob and reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. Patty didn't just check boarding passes. She judged souls. To Patty, the gate wasn't a service counter. It was her kingdom, and she was the dragon guarding the cave. Sarah watched as the man in front of her, a tall, heavy-set guy in a wrinkled suit, scanned his phone. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Henderson," Patty said, her voice dripping with a rehearsed, sugary sweetness that didn't reach her eyes. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that showed teeth without warmth. The man grunted and walked past. Sarah stepped up. She pulled her phone out, the QR code for seat 1A, glowing on the screen. She held it toward the scanner. "Hold it right there," Patty said. The sweetness was gone, instantly replaced by a cold, flat command. Sarah paused the scanner, laser flickering red just inches from her screen. "Is something wrong?" Patty didn't look at the screen. She looked at Sarah. She scanned her from the scuffed white sneakers to the hoodie, then up to Sarah's face. Sarah's hair was in a messy bun, her face free of makeup, revealing the dark circles under her eyes. "This is the first class lane," Patty said, loud enough for the people in the economy line to hear. She pointed a manicured finger toward the crowded general boarding area. "Group 5 is that way." "I know," Sarah said softly, her voice raspy from exhaustion. "I'm in Group 1. Seat 1A. She tried to scan her phone again. Patty's hand shot out, covering the scanner. The contact was shocking, the slap of her palm against the plastic echoing slightly. "I said hold it," Patty snapped. "Let me see your boarding pass. Physical copy." "I'm using the app," Sarah said, trying to keep her patience. "It's right here." "App's glitch," Patty said dismissively. "And frankly, I need to verify you are who you say you are. We've had a lot of issues lately with people trying to sneak into cabins they didn't pay for, using screenshots of other people's passes." Sarah blinked. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and ugly. "I didn't steal a screenshot. I bought this ticket." "Can I see ID?" Patty demanded. Sarah sighed, dropping her heavy bag to the floor. She dug into her purse and produced her driver's license. She handed it over. Patty took the license, holding it up to the light, as if looking for a watermark, then squinted at Sarah, then back at the photo. "This photo looks different," Patty muttered. "Hair is straight in the photo." "I had a blowout that day," Sarah said. "Look, my flight leaves in 20 minutes. Can I please board?" Patty handed the ID back with a sneer. "Don't get an attitude with me, miss. I have federal authority to deny boarding to anyone exhibiting aggression." "Aggression?" Sarah's eyebrows shot up. "I'm just standing here." "You're blocking the line," Patty retorted. "Step aside. I need to clear the real first-class passengers while I verify your ticket in the system. I'm marking you as a security flag for now." "A security flag?" Sarah felt a cold prickle of shock. "On what grounds?" "Suspicious behavior and inconsistent documentation," Patty recited, turning her shoulder to Sarah to address the man behind her. "Next, please. Sorry for the delay, sir. Some people just don't understand the rules." Sarah stood frozen. She wasn't just being delayed. She was being publicly shamed. The man behind her, a guy in a golf polo, rolled his eyes at Sarah as he squeezed past. "Come on, lady, move it. You're holding us up." Sarah stepped to the side of the podium, her heart beginning to hammer a slow, heavy rhythm against her ribs. She took a deep breath. "Do not make a scene," she told herself. "You are the owner. You have to handle this with dignity." She watched Patty greet the next 5 passengers, all white, all dressed in business casual or suits with that same fake, sugary smile. "Welcome aboard. Right this way. Thank you for your loyalty." It wasn't the dress code. Sarah knew that. The guy in 2B was wearing sweatpants and flip-flops. It wasn't the app. Everyone else used the app. It was her. Sarah pulled out her phone and sent a text message to a number saved simply as Board of Directors, Emergency Line. Text, "Who is the station manager at JFK? Need a name immediately." She waited. Patty glanced over, saw Sarah on her phone, and narrowed her eyes. "Profound disregard for crew instructions," Patty muttered, loud enough for her colleague, a younger man named Jason, to hear. Jason looked nervous. He glanced at Sarah, then back at Patty. "Patty, maybe just let her on." "If the scanner clears it," Jason whispered. "No," Patty hissed. "She's got an attitude. And look at that bag, it's oversized. She's probably trying to stuff a carry-on into the overhead that belongs to a paying customer. We verify everything." Sarah stepped back up to the podium during a lull in the line. "Ma'am," Sarah said, her voice firm now. "My bag fits the dimensions. My ticket is valid. You have 0 grounds to keep me here. I would like to speak to your supervisor." Patty laughed. It was a dry barking sound. I am the supervisor on the floor right now, honey. But if you want to waste more time, be my friend. Patty picked up the landline phone on the desk. Greg? Yeah, it's Patty at B22. I got a code red here. Yeah. Passenger is refusing to comply, becoming belligerent, demanding to see a manager. Yeah. Can you come down? We might need to escort her out. She hung up and smirked at Sarah. Greg is coming, but I promise you he's not going to be happy you dragged him out of his coffee break. Sarah looked at the gate agent's name tag. Patricia M. Okay, Patricia, Sarah said quietly. Call Greg. Sarah looked down at her phone. A reply had come through. Text station. Manager is Greg Stevens. Regional director is on a flight to LA. Why Sarah didn't reply. She just unlocked her phone and opened the camera app. She didn't raise it high, just held it at chest level, recording the audio and the scene. She had firing people down to a science, but she had never fired an entire roster of staff before she even officially took the job. Today might be a first. Greg Stevens arrived 4 minutes later. He walked with the heavy-footed stride of a man who enjoyed the small amount of power he wielded a little too much. He was wearing a cheap grey suit that was tight around the shoulders and his tie was loosened. He looked like a man who had spent 20 years in middle management and hated every second of it. He bypassed Sarah completely and went straight behind the podium to Patty. They whispered for a moment. Patty pointed at Sarah, then mimed someone shouting and waving their arms, something Sarah absolutely had not done. Greg nodded, his face hardening. He turned to face Sarah, crossing his arms over his chest. He didn't introduce himself. Patty tells me you're causing a disturbance, Greg said. His voice was loud, projected for the audience of seated passengers waiting for Group 3. I'm not causing a disturbance, Sarah said calmly. I'm trying to board a flight for which I have a first-class ticket. Patricia here refused to scan my pass, claimed my ID was fake, and is now accusing me of aggression because I asked for a supervisor. Greg looked her up and down. He let out a short, derisive huff. Ma'am, our agents are trained to spot inconsistencies. If Patty says you were aggressive, I believe her. She's been with Vanguard for 20 years. And I've been a customer for 10. Sarah lied. She had flown private for the last 5, but they didn't need to know that. Does tenure excuse discrimination? The word hung in the air like smoke. Greg's face turned red. Watch it. You start throwing words like that around, and we're going to have a legal problem. We have the right to refuse service to anyone who endangers the safety or comfort of other passengers. How am I endangering comfort? Sarah asked, gesturing to her motionless stance. I am standing here, quietly. Your tone is hostile, Greg said. He leaned over the counter. Here is what's going to happen. You are going to apologize to Patty for your behavior. You're going to check that bag. He pointed to her modest leather weekender at the gate for a fee of $75. And then if we have space, we might let you board, but not in first class. We gave your seat away. Sarah felt a sharp spike of adrenaline. You did what? You were flagged as a security risk and a no-show. Patty chimed in, smiling smugly. So I upgraded Mr. Henderson on the standby list. 1A is taken. Best I can do is 34B. Middle seat back row by the lavatory. This is illegal, Sarah said, her voice dropping an octave. It wasn't fear. It was fury. You cannot downgrade a paid first-class ticket to economy forcibly without compensation or cause just because you don't like my face. I can do whatever I want, Greg said, stepping out from behind the podium to tower over her. It's my gate, my rules. Now do you want the middle seat, or do you want me to call Port Authority and have you banned from the airline permanently? A young woman sitting nearby held up her phone. She was filming. Greg saw it and pointed a finger at her. Put that away. Recording airline staff is a violation of federal privacy policies. Actually, it's not, the young woman said. It's a public space. Security, Greg shouted, waving to a TSA officer who was walking past the food court. Sarah looked at Greg. She looked at Patty. You gave my seat away, Sarah repeated slowly. To Mr. Henderson. That's right, Patty said. A Diamond member who knows how to dress and act like a gentleman. Okay, Sarah said. She reached into her pocket. Don't reach for anything, Greg yelled, stepping back as if she were pulling a weapon. Sarah slowly withdrew her phone again. I'm not reaching for a weapon, Greg. I'm reaching for my email. I don't care about your email, Greg spat. You should, Sarah said, because I'm looking at the org chart for Vanguard Airlines, and I see your name here, Gregory Stevens, Station Manager, Salary Band 4, reports to Regional Director Davis. Greg frowned. How do you have access to internal docs? And Patty, Sarah continued swiping the screen, Patricia Muldoon, Senior Gate Agent, 3 formal HR complaints in the last 2 years for, oh, this is interesting, racially insensitive language and unprofessional conduct. Yet you're still here. Patty's face went pale. Who are you? You told me I didn't belong in first class, Sarah said, stepping closer to the velvet rope. The fear was gone. The exhaustion was gone. All that was left was the cold steel of a woman who negotiated billion-dollar mergers for breakfast. You told me I looked like I couldn't afford it. I was just doing my job, Patty stammered, looking at Greg for help. You're not doing your job, Sarah corrected. You're abusing the tiny amount of power you think you have. That's enough, Greg snapped, though his voice wavered slightly. I'm calling the police. You're hacking our system. That's a felony. I didn't hack anything, Sarah said. She turned the phone screen around so they could see it. It wasn't a hacked database. It was a digital press release drafted and ready to be published on the Bloomberg terminal. The headline read, Desmond and CO acquires Vanguard Airlines. Sarah Desmond named interim CEO, effective immediately. Below the headline was a photo of Sarah. She was wearing a power suit in the photo, her hair blown out straight, but the eyes were the same. The face was undeniable. Greg squinted at the screen. He looked at the photo. He looked at Sarah. He looked back at the photo. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like a curtain falling. That's you, he whispered. That's me, Sarah said. I own this airline, Greg. I own the plane. I own the gate. I own the computer system you just used to delete my ticket. And effectively, as of right now, I own your mortgage. The silence that fell over Gate B22 was absolute. Even the rain outside seemed to stop. Patty made a small, choking sound. You're the new owner. And you, Sarah said, turning her gaze to Patty. You just gave the CEO's seat to Mr. Henderson. I didn't know, Patty cried, her hands shaking. You were wearing a hoodie. You looked like nobody. And that, Sarah, said, her voice like ice, is exactly the problem. You treat people you think are nobodies like trash. And you treat people you think are important like kings. You judged me based on my skin and my clothes. Sarah tapped her phone screen. She dialed a number. Who Who are you calling? Greg asked, sweat beading on his forehead. I'm calling the director of operations, Sarah said. I'm grounding this flight. You can't do that, Greg pleaded. The delay statistics, my metrics. Your metrics are the least of your worries, Sarah said as the call connected. Hello, David. Yes, it's Sarah. I'm at JFK, gate B22. Shut the door. Nobody boards flight 404. Yeah, we have a personnel issue. A massive one. She hung up and looked at the terrified staff. Nobody moves, she commanded. I want every member of the gate staff and the cabin crew lined up here, now. The atmosphere at gate B22 shifted from frustration to a suffocating electric tension. The 300 passengers previously annoyed by the delay were now glued to the spectacle. Phones were raised like lighters at a concert, recording every second. The door from the jet bridge, the portal to the plane, swung open. Captain Richard Miller stepped out. His brow furrowed beneath his hat. He was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite, with silver hair and 4 gold stripes on his epaulets. Behind him trailed the purser, a woman named Linda, who looked confused and worried. Greg. Captain Miller barked, his voice booming over the quiet murmurs of the crowd. Why is the ground stop order coming from corporate? We were cleared for pushback. We're burning fuel sitting at the gate. Greg Stevens, the station manager, who had been puffing his chest out mere minutes ago, now looked like a deflated balloon. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at Sarah. Sarah turned to the captain. She didn't flinch. I ordered the ground stop, Captain Miller. Miller looked at Sarah, the hoodie, the sneakers, the trench coat. He scoffed, a reflexive reaction to seeing someone who looked like a passenger giving orders. He turned back to Greg. Who is this Greg? Get security to remove her. We have a slot time to hit. She's the owner, Rick, Greg squeaked. Miller paused. Excuse me, Sarah Desmond, she said, extending a hand. She didn't wait for him to take it. Desmond and Company finalized the acquisition of Vanguard this morning. You can check your ACRS system or call dispatch if you doubt me. But right now, this plane isn't going anywhere until I clean house. Miller stared at her. He was a company man, but he was also a pilot who respected hierarchy. He looked at Greg's pale face and Patty's trembling hands. He realized this wasn't a prank. Ma'am, Miller said, his tone shifting from authoritative to cautious. With all due respect, we have passengers on board. The delay costs are... I don't care about the costs, Sarah interrupted. I care about the culture, and the culture at this gate is rotten. She pointed to the counter. Bring the entire flight crew out here. Now. I want everyone to see this. That's against procedure, Miller argued. I write the procedure, Sarah countered. Get them, or you can hand over your wings, too. Miller tightened his jaw, nodded once, and turned to Linda. Get the crew off. Everyone. As the flight attendants filed off the plane, confused and whispering, Sarah turned back to Patty Muldoon. The gate agent was clutching the edge of the podium, her knuckles white. She looked like a trapped animal. Patty, Sarah said softly. The quietness of her voice was more terrifying than a shout. You said you gave my seat to Mr. Henderson because he looked like a gentleman, because he fit the profile. Patty swallowed hard. It was a judgment call. We have discretion to discriminate, Sarah finished for her. I want you to go onto that plane walk to seat 1A and tell Mr. Henderson to get off. Patty's eyes went wide. I can't do that. He's already drinking his pre-departure champagne. He's a Diamond member. I don't care if he's the Pope, Sarah said. You put him there illegally. You stole a paid seat from the owner of the airline to give a favor to a man because you liked his suit better than my hoodie. Now you are going to go in there and you are going to tell him that you made a mistake, and you are going to escort him off." "He'll scream at me," Patty whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "Yes," Sarah said, crossing her arms. "He will, and you're going to take it, because that is the humiliation you tried to inflict on me. Go." Patty didn't move. "Go." Sarah shouted the command, cracking like a whip. Patty flinched and stumbled toward the jet bridge. Sarah signaled to the cameraman, the random passenger filming. "Follow her. I want a record of this." The crowd at the gate watched in stunned silence as Patty disappeared down the tunnel. Moments later, shouting erupted from the plane. "Are you kidding me?" A male voice boomed from the tunnel, echoing into the terminal. "I'm already settled." "You upgraded me." "I'm so sorry, sir. I made a mistake." Patty's voice wailed thin and pathetic. "I'm not moving." Sarah walked to the microphone at the podium. She pressed the button. Her voice rang out through the gate area and down the jet bridge. "Mr. Henderson." Sarah spoke into the PA system. "This is Sarah Desmond, the CEO of Vanguard Airlines. You are currently trespassing. Passing in a seat that belongs to me. If you are not off this aircraft in 60 seconds, I will have Port Authority arrest you for theft of services and ban you from this airline for life. Tick-tock." The silence returned. 10 seconds passed. Then 20. Then Mr. Henderson appeared in the doorway of the jet bridge, red-faced, carrying his briefcase. He stormed out, nearly knocking Patty over as she scurried behind him. "This is outrageous," Henderson yelled, pointing a finger at Sarah. "Do you know who I am? I spend $50,000 a year with this airline." "Not anymore," Sarah said coolly. "Your account is frozen pending an investigation into how often you accept upgrades you didn't pay for. Goodbye, Mr. Henderson." Henderson looked around at the crowd. He saw the phones pointing at him. He saw the mocking smiles of the passengers he had cut in front of earlier. His bravado crumbled. He put his head down and walked away, disappearing into the terminal crowds. Patty stood alone by the jet bridge door, shivering. "Now," Sarah said, turning to Greg and Patty, "let's talk about your employment." Sarah didn't do this in a private office. She didn't do it behind closed doors where HR could sanitize the language and offer severance packages to avoid lawsuits. She did it right there on the dirty grey carpet of Gate B22 in front of God and everyone. She picked up the landline phone on the desk again. "Security." "Yes, send 2 officers to Gate B22, not to arrest a passenger, to escort staff off the premises." She hung up and looked at Greg Stevens. "Greg," she began, "you're the station manager. Your job is to ensure policy is followed and that customers are treated with dignity. When Patty refused my valid ticket, you backed her up without investigating. Why?" Greg wiped sweat from his upper lip. We have a policy of backing our agents. Solidarity." "Solidarity is for unions," Sarah snapped. "Management is for accountability. You didn't back her because of policy. You backed her because it was easier than doing your job. You saw a woman in a hoodie and assumed I was trash. You saw a guy in a suit and assumed he was right." She pulled a folded piece of paper from her back pocket. It was a printout she had prepared in the car, just in case, but she hadn't expected to use it so soon. "I have the complaints log for this station. Greg," she said, "in the last 6 months, 12 different passengers have filed formal complaints about discrimination at this gate. 12. All of them minority women or younger travelers dressed casually. Do you know what you did with those complaints?" Greg stayed silent. "You marked them as resolved customer aggression, and deleted them. Sarah said, her voice rising. You buried them. You let Patty and her clique run this gate like a high school cafeteria where only the cool kids get to sit at the table. I was under pressure, Greg shouted, his composure snapping. Corporate wants on-time departures. If we argue with passengers, the plane is late. It's faster to just deny boarding to the difficult ones. So I was difficult, Sarah asked. Or was I just existing while black? The crowd gasped. It was the elephant in the room, and she had just grabbed it by the trunk. I didn't mean it like that. Greg backpedaled, his hands raised in surrender. I have black friends. My cousin is married to. Stop, Sarah said, holding up a hand. Just stop. You're embarrassing yourself. She turned to Patty. Patty was weeping now. Ugly, heaving sobs. I have a pension, she cried. I have 2 years left until full retirement. Please. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. I'll apologize to you. I'll get down on my knees. Sarah looked at her with a mix of pity and disgust. Patty, this isn't about me anymore. If I was just a regular passenger, you would have ruined my trip. You would have taken my money, put me in a middle seat and laughed about it with your friends. You've done it before. Sarah gestured to the young woman in the front row of the seats, the one who had filmed the interaction earlier. You, Sarah said. What's your name? Chloe, the girl said, standing up. Chloe, have you ever dealt with Patty before? Chloe nodded vigorously. Last Christmas. She made me check my carry-on because she said the wheels looked too big. Then she let the guy behind me on with a literal guitar case and a duffel bag. When I cried, she told me to grow up. Liar, Patty shrieked. That bag was oversized. It fits in the sizer, Chloe yelled back. You just didn't like my hair. Sarah nodded. You see, Patty, it's a pattern, and today the pattern ends. 2 Port Authority police officers arrived, pushing through the crowd. They looked confused, seeing the staff crying, and a woman in a trench coat commanding the room. Officers, Sarah said. I am Sarah Desmond, CEO of Vanguard. These 2 individuals, she pointed to Greg and Patty, are no longer employees of this airline. They are trespassing in a secure work area. Please escort them to the curbside. Their badges are to be confiscated immediately. You can't do this, Patty screamed, lunging toward the computer to grab her purse. I gave 20 years to this company, and you spent the last 10 of them poisoning it, Sarah said. Hand over the badge, Patricia. Patty froze. Her shaking hand went to her lapel. She unclipped the plastic ID that had been her shield, her weapon, and her identity for 2 decades. She threw it on the counter. Greg was quieter. He knew the legal battle that was coming. He placed his badge gently on the desk. You'll hear from my lawyer. I have a team of 60 lawyers on retainer, Greg, Sarah said dryly. I look forward to it. The officers stepped forward. Let's go, folks. Don't make a scene. Don't make a scene, Sarah repeated, savoring the irony. That's good advice. As Patty and Greg were led away, Patty wailing, Greg sullen and red-faced, the terminal erupted. It wasn't a polite golf clap. It was a roar. People were clapping, cheering, and whistling. The relief was palpable. The dragon had been slain. Sarah didn't smile. She felt exhausted. Her adrenaline was crashing. But she wasn't done. She turned to the flight crew, the pilots and flight attendants, who were still standing there, looking terrified that they were next. Captain Miller, Sarah said. Miller stood at attention. Yes, Miss Desmond. Did you know? She asked. Know what, ma'am? Did you know they were screening passengers based on appearance? Did you know they were selling upgrades for favors? Miller hesitated. He looked at his shoes. There were rumors. We knew Patty was strict, but we stay in the cockpit. We don't see the boarding process. Ignorance is not a defense, Sarah said sternly. But I believe you, however things change today. From now on, if a gate agent treats a passenger with disrespect, you don't close the door. You call me. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am, Miller said, loud and clear. Good. Sarah looked at the crowd of passengers. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this delay. It was necessary to take out the trash. Laughter rippled through the crowd. I know you're all tired. I know you just want to get to Chicago. But I have one more problem to solve. She picked up the microphone again. Is there a passenger here named Marcus Reynolds? She asked. A young black man in a university hoodie raised his hand tentatively from the back of Group 4. That's me. Marcus, come up here, please. The young man walked forward, looking nervous. He was clutching a backpack. I saw your reservation earlier, Sarah said. You're a medical student, right? Heading to Chicago for an interview. Yes, ma'am, he said. Residency interview. And you're in seat 42E. Yeah, he smiled sheepishly. Student budget. Sarah typed something into the terminal. The printer whirred. She ripped off a boarding pass. Seat 1A is vacant, Sarah said, handing him the slip of paper. It's a lie flat. Get some sleep before your interview. You're the first passenger of the new Vanguard Airlines. Marcus looked at the ticket, then at Sarah. His jaw dropped. Are you serious? Dead serious, go board. You're holding up the flight. Marcus beamed, shaking her hand vigorously. Thank you. Thank you so much. He ran down the jet bridge. As for the rest of you, Sarah addressed the crowd. Drinks are free in economy today. My treat. Now let's get this plane in the air. The cheering started again as Sarah stepped away from the podium. She picked up her bag, the same bag Patty had sneered at, and prepared to walk onto the plane. But she wasn't going to 1A. She was going to take 42E. She needed to see what her airline looked like from the back of the bus. However, as she handed her boarding pass to the stunned young agent named Jason, the one who had tried to help her earlier, he stopped her. Miss Desmond, Jason said, his voice trembling. Yes, Jason. There's someone on the phone for you, on the internal line. It's the board of directors. They saw the live stream. Sarah felt a cold pit in her stomach. The passengers filming. The internet. Of course. What do they want? Sarah asked. Jason swallowed. They're calling for an emergency vote. They say you're mentally unstable and destroying shareholder value. They want to revoke your CEO status before the market opens. Sarah looked at the phone. The little red light was blinking furiously. The karma had hit the agents, but now the Empire was striking back. Sarah stared at the blinking red light on the receiver. The noise of the terminal seemed to fade away, replaced by the high-pitched whine of corporate machinery grinding into gear. She picked up the receiver. This is Desmond, she said, her voice steady, despite the adrenaline crash. Sarah, what the hell do you think you're doing? The voice on the other end was Charles Sterling, the chairman of the board. Charles was 72, a man who believed airlines were run by spreadsheets and golf handshakes, not viral moments. He sounded like he was about to have a stroke. I'm cleaning up the mess you left me, Charles, Sarah replied, leaning against the dirty counter where Patty had stood moments before. I just removed a cancer from the New York hub. You removed a 20-year veteran on a live stream, Charles roared. Do you have any idea what's happening? The stock is wobbling in after-hours trading. The shareholders are calling for blood. You look unhinged, Sarah. You look like a tyrant. I look like a leader, Sarah corrected. Unlike the management team, that let 12 discrimination complaints slide because they didn't want to deal with the paperwork. Did you know about those, Charles? There was a pause on the line, a beat too long. We handle matters internally, Charles said, his voice dropping to a dangerous chill. We don't parade our staff in front of the mob. Listen to me closely. We are invoking Clause 14B of the acquisition agreement. Conduct detrimental to the brand. We are calling an emergency board meeting in Chicago at 2 p.m. If you are not there to defend yourself, we will vote to suspend your executive powers pending a psychiatric evaluation. Sarah checked her watch. It was 10 a.m. The flight to Chicago was 2 hours and 30 minutes. She would land at 12:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. It was tight. I'll be there, Sarah said. And Charles, make sure you record the meeting. You're going to want to remember the moment you tried to blackmail the woman who just bought your golden parachute. She slammed the phone down. Jason, the young gate agent, was staring at her with wide eyes. Ms. Desmond, are you okay? I'm fine, Jason. Sarah lied. She grabbed her bag. I need you to close the flight. Get everyone on board. We leave in 10 minutes. No delays. Yes, ma'am. Ms. Desmond. Jason hesitated. Your seat. Marcus is in 1A. Do you want me to move someone else? No, Sarah said, tightening her ponytail. I'm taking 42E. I need to see exactly what we're selling back there. She walked down the jet bridge, her heart pounding. The board was trying to frame her as unstable. They wanted to paint her as an angry black woman who snapped at a poor, defenseless employee. It was a narrative as old as time, and if she didn't control it, it would destroy her before the plane even touched down. She boarded the aircraft. The flight attendants, who had been briefed by Captain Miller, stood at attention in the galley. They looked terrified. Relax, Sarah whispered to Linda the purser. Just do your job. Pretend I'm not here. She walked past the first-class cabin. She saw Marcus, the medical student, fast asleep in 1A, fully reclined with a blanket pulled up to his chin. He looked peaceful. A small smile touched Sarah's lips. Worth it. She continued back. The transition from first to economy was jarring. The air grew warmer. The seats narrowed. The overhead bins were jammed full. When she reached row 42, the very last row, she found her seat. It was the middle seat, between a large man asleep against the window and a teenage girl listening to loud music on the aisle. The seat did not recline. The wall behind it was the lavatory. "Excuse me," Sarah murmured, squeezing past the teenager. She sat down, her knees pressed into the metal frame of the seat in front of her. The smell of the chemical toilet wafted through the thin bulkhead wall every time someone opened the door. This, she thought. This is what people pay $400 for. The plane pushed back. As the engines roared to life, Sarah pulled out her laptop. She didn't have time to sleep. She had a war to win. As Vanguard Flight 404 climbed through the rain clouds and leveled off at cruising altitude, Sarah purchased the Wi-Fi package for $19.99. $20 for slow internet, she muttered, noting the price in her digital notebook. Change this immediately. She logged on to Twitter, X, and TikTok. What she saw made her gasp. The video hadn't just gone viral. It had gone supernova. The hashtag Vanguard Justice was trending #1 worldwide, displacing the Super Bowl news. The video clip of Patty snatching the phone and Greg yelling, "I don't care about your email," had 50 million views in 2 hours. But it wasn't just the firing. The internet sleuths, the terrifyingly efficient hive mind of the web, had gone to work. A user named at Data Detective had dug up Patty Muldoon's public Facebook profile before she could delete it. It was a gold mine of incriminating evidence. There were posts complaining about certain types of passengers ruining the neighborhood. There were memes mocking non-English speakers. Then the real-life karma hit harder. A TikTok user had stitched the video with her own story. "I know that guy that's Greg Stevens. He denied my grandmother a wheelchair last year because he said she didn't look disabled enough. She missed her flight and missed her sister's funeral. He laughed at us." The comments were a waterfall of similar stories. It wasn't just Gate B22. It was a systemic rot within Vanguard's culture that had been festering for years, protected by middle management, who only cared about metrics. Sarah screenshotted everything. Then she saw the counter-narrative. A press release had just gone out from the office of the board of Vanguard Airlines. Statement: Vanguard Airlines is deeply concerned by the unauthorized and aggressive actions taken by interim CEO Sarah Desmond at JFK International Airport. While we do not condone discrimination, we also do not condone the public humiliation of staff without due process. The board is reviewing Ms. Desmond's capability to lead. They were trying to get ahead of the story. They were trying to make her the villain. Sarah's fingers flew across her keyboard. She wasn't going to issue a press statement. She was going to issue a declaration of war. She opened the company's internal server, which she still had access to, thanks to the IT department, not yet receiving the board's lockout order. She navigated to the Executive Shared Drive. She found the folder labeled Audit_Complaints_2024. She opened it. It was worse than she thought. It wasn't just 12 complaints at JFK. There were hundreds across the system. And at the bottom of the quarterly report, there was a digital signature signing off on "No action required." The signature belonged to Charles Sterling. Sarah smiled. It was a cold, predatory smile. She drafted an email. To all employees, Vanguard Global. Board of Directors. Press Relations. Subject: The future of Vanguard team. I am currently writing this from Seat 42E on Flight 404. My knees are crushed against the seat in front of me, and the Wi-Fi cost me $20. I am sitting here because I believe a CEO should experience the same reality as their customers. The board has issued a statement calling my actions aggressive. They claim I violated due process. Attached to this email is a document signed by Chairman Charles Sterling. It shows that he personally reviewed and dismissed 412 reports of racial and gender discrimination in the last fiscal year. He chose to protect abusive metrics over human beings. I did not fire the staff at JFK because I was angry. I fired them because they were symptoms of a disease that starts at the top. I am landing in Chicago in 90 minutes. I am coming to the board meeting, and I am bringing these documents with me. To the employees reading this, if you have ever been told to ignore a problem, to hide a complaint, or to mistreat a passenger to save time, that era ends today. If the board votes to remove me, they are voting to keep the rot. The choice is theirs. See you soon. Sarah Desmond. EO. She hit send. The air in the cabin seemed to shift. 2 minutes later, a flight attendant walked down the aisle collecting trash. She stopped at row 42. It was Linda. Linda looked at Sarah. Her eyes were wet. She leaned in close, pretending to take a coffee cup. "We just got the email on our crew iPads," Linda whispered. "The pilots got it too." And, Sarah asked, her heart thumping, Captain Miller just announced he's flying at maximum cruise speed. Linda smiled a genuine, warm smile. He says he wants to make sure you're not late for your meeting. Sarah nodded. Thank you, Linda. No, Linda said. Thank you. We've hated Sterling for years. He cut our pensions to pay for his bonuses. Linda slipped a small bottle of water and a bag of almonds onto Sarah's tray table. From the crew, we've got your back. Sarah checked her phone again. The email had leaked. Of course it had. CNBC was now running a breaking news banner. Vanguard Civil War new CEO leaks documents implicating chairman in cover-up. The stock price, which had dipped, suddenly spiked. The market loved a reformer. The narrative had flipped. Sarah wasn't the angry black woman anymore. She was the corporate avenger. But the real twist was waiting for her on the ground. As the plane began its descent into O'Hare, the pilot came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Miller. We're beginning our final approach. I've just been informed by air traffic control that we have a bit of a situation on the ground. It seems there's a large welcoming committee at Terminal 3. We've been given priority landing clearance. Flight attendants prepare for arrival. Sarah looked out the window. The grey grid of Chicago rushed up to meet them. She smoothed her trench coat. She closed her laptop. She wasn't just landing in Chicago. She was landing in the history books. The plane touched down with a smooth thud. As they taxied to the gate, Sarah saw it. Through the window on the tarmac and inside the terminal glass, she could see people. Not just a few. Thousands. Employees in Vanguard uniforms holding signs. Passengers. Reporters. One sign held by a baggage handler read, Clean House, Sarah. Another read, Seat 42, E-Matters. Sarah stood up as the seatbelt sign dinged off. The passengers around her, who had slowly realized who she was during the flight, started to clap. It began with the teenage girl next to her, then the sleeping man, then the rows ahead. Go get 'em, boss, the man in 42F said, waking up. Sarah grabbed her bag. She walked down the long aisle past the economy seats, past the business class, past Marcus, who was waking up and giving her a thumbs up. She stood at the cabin door. Linda opened it. The jet bridge was lined with police officers. For a second, Sarah froze. Had Charles actually called the cops on her? A sergeant stepped forward. He looked stern. Monsieur Desmond? Yes, Sarah said, bracing herself for handcuffs. We're here to escort you to the boardroom, the sergeant said, breaking into a grin. And to keep the press off you. Chairman Sterling tried to have security block your badge, but, well, my wife is a flight attendant. We're on your side. Sarah let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Lead the way, she said. The double doors of the Vanguard boardroom on the 40th floor didn't just open. They were pushed wide by the police sergeant. Sarah Desmond walked in. She was still wearing the trench coat, the sneakers, and the hoodie. She looked like she had just walked off the street, which technically she had. Around the massive mahogany table sat 12 men and women in suits that cost more than most people's cars. At the head of the table sat Charles Sterling. His face was a mask of purple rage. You have some nerve showing your face here, Sterling spat, standing up. Security, why are these officers letting her in? Sit down, Charles, Sarah said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. She didn't take a seat. She walked to the window, looking down at the tarmac where hundreds of employees were still visible, holding their signs. You are suspended, Sterling shouted. slamming his hand on the table. "We took a vote 10 minutes ago. You are out. You are a liability. You leaked confidential company data to the public." "I leaked evidence of a crime," Sarah corrected, turning to face him. "And I didn't just leak it to the employees. I sent it to the SEC and the Department of Justice before we landed." The room went dead silent. The other board members exchanged terrified glances. One of them a man named Henderson, no relation to the passenger, but equally spineless, slowly closed his laptop. "You did what?" Sterling whispered. "You didn't just ignore the complaints, Charles," Sarah said, walking toward him. "I went through the financial records in that folder. You were paying out consulting fees to a firm owned by your wife to bury the discrimination lawsuits. That's embezzlement. That's fraud." Sterling laughed nervously. "You can't prove that. It's a clerical error." "Is it?" Sarah asked. She nodded to the police sergeant. The sergeant stepped forward, but he didn't move toward Sarah. He moved toward Charles Sterling. "Charles Sterling," the sergeant said, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "We have a federal warrant for your arrest on charges of wire fraud embezzlement and conspiracy to obstruct justice." Sterling's jaw dropped. "This is insane. I am the chairman. You can't touch me." "Watch me," the sergeant said, spinning Sterling around. The click of the handcuffs echoed through the silent room. It was the loudest sound in the world. As Sterling was frog-marched out of the room, sputtering threats and legal jargon, the remaining board members sat frozen. They were sharks. But they had just seen a megalodon eat their captain. Sarah walked to the head of the table, the empty chair where Sterling had just sat. She looked at the remaining 11 members. "We have a lot of work to do," Sarah said, placing her hands on the leather chair. "First order of business, we are rewriting the dress code. Second, we are rehiring every wrongful termination victim from the last 5 years. Third, we are removing the change fees." She paused, looking at Henderson. "Unless anyone objects." Henderson shook his head rapidly. "No objections. Welcome, Chairwoman Desmond." Sarah finally sat down. She sank into the leather, feeling the exhaustion of the last 36 hours wash over her. She took a deep breath. She pulled her phone out. There was a text from Marcus, the medical student she had upgraded. Text just landed. "Best nap of my life. I think I'm gonna ace this interview. Thanks, boss." Sarah smiled. She placed the phone on the table. "Item number 4, she said to the room. "Let's talk about gate B22. The airline was hers, and this time it was going to fly right. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you handle a power trip. Patty and Greg thought they were just bullying a random passenger in a hoodie. They didn't realize they were handing the keys to the castle to the one woman who could burn it down and rebuild it from scratch. It's a brutal reminder that you never ever know who you are talking to. Title, uniform, and status don't make you better than anyone else, and treating people with dignity costs absolutely nothing but disrespect can cost you everything. Charles Sterling lost his freedom. Patty lost her pension, and Sarah Desmond proved that true power doesn't need to shout to be heard. What would you have done if you were Sarah? Would you have fired them on the spot, or was she too harsh? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of karma and justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow, and subscribe so you don't miss the next crazy story. I've got a wild one coming up next week about a landlord who tried to evict a tenant only to find out the tenant owned the bank. You don't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and stay humble.